Hello and welcome to the Jackie Tan podcast, where we dive into real conversations about resilience, growth, and living authentically. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Each week, we bring you inspiring stories, practical insights, and a community of voices all here to support and inspire you on your journey. So whether you're looking for motivation, a new perspective, or just a dose of positivity, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Joining me on the podcast today is Aussie Paralympian Angus Hincksman, an inspiring young para-athlete who has quickly become a standout in middle distance running. Competing in the T38 classification for athletes with cerebral palsy, Angus has overcome challenges from a young age. He now represents Australia on the global stage. Fresh from the 2024 Paris Paralympic Games, where he performed incredibly, Angus has already achieved multiple national records and even earned a bronze medal at the World Para Athletics Championships. Beyond his achievements, Angus is passionate about advocating for para sport, dedicating himself to inspiring the next generation of athletes. Today, I'm pumped to bring you this episode where you get to hear about his journey, challenges, and what the future holds. Enjoy this episode with Angus Hincksman. Angus, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You are a T38 1500 meter runner. You have broken national records. You've medaled at the World Para Athletics Championships. And recently, you represented Australia at the 2024 Paris Paralympics. Now that you've had a little bit of time to settle in back home, when you look back on Paris, what are the feelings? How would you describe it?
It's been a pretty intense time for me, I guess. It was it was a pretty big lead up, and I guess now that's sort of over, this wasn't necessarily a time I was thinking about because we were so hyper focused on the race. So now to actually be in this point of time where you hadn't really thought about it, where everything's been planning for the future, and then to experience that moment, it's all been moving pretty quickly, and I guess it's been nice to sort of come home, have some time off, sort of spend a lot of time with family because we had a long period of time before the race where I was traveling and on a couple of training camps. So before that, it would probably been like 2 months between seeing my parents, which has been a pretty long time for me. Like I'm obviously pretty young, still living at home, so then to have sort of 2 months away from my family before like the biggest moment of my life was pretty interesting. So it's nice to sort of be home and sort of unpack that journey that I had sort of away from home as well, and tell them all my experiences. And then that race was incredible, to say the least. It was in front of a packed stadium, which I was so fortunate to have, and then to see my mum immediately after the race was a pretty emotional moment as well, and to sort of have that team experience was incredible, meeting so many new people, and yeah, it's just something I'll never forget.
What do you remember of that last lap?
I remember it pretty like vividly. The sort of few laps before it was all sort of merged into one. It was a lot of jostling, and I remember like thinking to myself like I just want to make sure I stay out of traffic. I don't want to get tripped over because I was pretty confident it was going to be a slow race, which is what it turned out to be. And I remember coming down the home straight towards the bell and looking up at the big screen where I could see everyone behind me sort of like lining up a few people jostling, and I was just trying to like make sure I was keeping a presence on the track and sort of hard to overtake. And I remember as we actually reached the bell, I looked on the big screen, I saw Nate, the Canadian, sort of getting sucked back as things started to like speed up. And I thought like, this is my moment. I've got clear running. Like I've got a sort of advantage here being in front of everyone to sort of get a couple steps on them before they can react to my move. And I just knew as soon as I make this move, I can't back down. I've only got one, especially because we left it so late. And I just knew I needed to sort of do my move with confidence and make sure I don't second guess myself, which is what I did, and it didn't end up paying off on the day. But yeah, I'm proud of how I did it, and I know that when it came to that race, I did everything correctly, and I just didn't have the legs for it.
When you say you did everything correctly, what does that mean for you? Like, did you have a strategy going into it? And you also said like it was a slow race. So how do you manage what's happening with the strategy that you've got in your head?
Yeah, so there were a couple scenarios that we were sort of preparing ourselves for. Me and my coach, we knew like a fair few people in the field, so we obviously knew Reese. We had to get to race against him in the regular season in Australia, which is something we're really fortunate about. Got the opportunity to race Nate last year at Worlds, which was pretty cool. And then we had the Tunisian who we'd only watched sort of online in Kobe, which was pretty interesting. Obviously, not having the opportunity to race him before Paris, because Athletics Australia were looking to chase quota spots, which is a little more complicated and it'll take a bit of time to like explain. But yeah, that was a pretty interesting dynamic. Obviously, coming into a major event with some new faces who are obviously pretty strong and not actually racing all of them. So that was sort of a dynamic that we needed to make sure, like I wasn't really overthinking about, and I just wanted to make sure I had confidence in my ability and focus on the things I can control instead of sort of worrying about other people and what they're doing, I guess. Yeah. What was the question again? I got
So yeah. So it starts out slow. Do you change your strategy or do you go in?
So yeah. We had those three guys. We knew the Tunisian, he's like a sort of 400-meter runner. So as it ended up turning out, he was in a bit of a box seat for that race, and we sort of knew that heading in. And I'd had a pretty good training camp leading up. We were in London and in St. Moritz in Switzerland. I'd run it was a 6-second PB in a race in Germany, running like 3:51, which was like pretty massive. And we did after that race in Montpellier in the staging camp, we did a couple like speed sessions where I was like sort of testing out the waters on what it would be like if it was to come down to a like sort of 400-meter wind up. So we did this 600-meter lactic session where I went through 400 in like 52 seconds, which is like faster than my 400 PB. And then I went on to do 200 more meters. So I was like, I would say for me, that session was one of the moments where I was like, I'm like confident if this race comes out slow, and I think I can like have a good chance of winning. And for me, the reason I didn't really want to lead it was obviously because leading a 1500 meters is pretty difficult. They say there's about a 3-second differential between laps if you're leading it, compared to sitting behind, say, a pacer. So in theory, if I was to lead it, I would pretty much be helping Nate and Reese sort of sit in and save energy while I'm obviously making it quick, making it hard for the Tunisian, whose PB is a lot slower than ours. But those two guys would pretty much beat me like 8 out of 10 times, which at that point in time, I was like sort of only focused on the gold. I was ranked second in the world that year, just behind Reese, who had run like 3:49 like 3 weeks prior. So I obviously knew he was in good shape, and that was something we were taking into consideration when thinking about these strategies. So for me, it was like, if I was to run that sort of race where I let it out, there's a good chance I secure a medal, but I would sort of be giving away the gold, which at that period of time, like I wasn't ready for. And now in hindsight, it's like something I would way rather have done, but you can't really predict that beforehand, which has been the tough part for me, is sort of getting over that struggle of looking back on it and now knowing the outcome. So yeah.
Well, hindsight's a beautiful thing, but
Yeah, yeah.
what what lessons do you take away from that race?
Um, I would say just making sure you're coming in with confidence and like just trusting your training. I found heading into the race, well, not heading into the race, but in my staging camp, I was a little bit isolated because my race was towards the end of the scheduling on the last day. I was in staging camp for a lot longer than the other athletes who went to the village a little earlier, which meant I had a little bit more time to myself and a lot more time to think about the race, sort of without a massive support system around me, which was something I knew was going to happen, but I don't know if I was 100% ready for. So I spent a lot of time sort of questioning if I'd done everything right, if I was doing the right training. And I don't think it affected my race negatively, but I think now that I've experienced it, I would be able to sort of treat it better or like not let it control me as much as it might have done. And just trust my coaching and doing my training, I guess.
Yeah, so thinking about that, are there any strategies that you would use now to work with that, overcome that?
I would say not being afraid to reach out to like friends and family and just speak your mind, which is probably something I didn't do enough of, was calling people that I trusted and were in my support system, I guess. And yeah, just making sure I just share my feelings with others and sort of just explaining to people how I feel, because I feel like at that period of time I didn't really know what I was experiencing, and looking back on it, I understand it now, and I understand how I could have probably got through that a little better. And a lot of this experience has just been learning for me, and I think overall coming forth was probably a blessing, because I think it's just made me understand more and sort of made me reflect more on everything I did. And I like to think that if I did get a medal, I probably wouldn't be as driven as I am now, sort of because I was so close and I watched that medal sort of slip away from my fingers. I'm way more appreciative of what I actually did and what I have to do to actually get the job done. And I think now I'm just way more driven to do that. And I know what it's going to take, I guess.
Yeah, you can't manufacture that hunger, that drive to
No,
get there. So yeah, a
not at
blessing in
all.
disguise, absolutely. And you also
Mm,
mentioned, reaching out, and I think that's such a important thing to note, for yourself and any athlete, but also anyone in general at any time in their life when the overthinking does come in. Sharing what is on your mind is such a healthy thing to do.
yeah.
You mentioned before, was it Athletics Australia looking at quota meets? Sorry, what
Yeah.
what was
So
that?
earlier in the year we had our Parallel Champs at Kobe, which was an event that was meant to happen in 2022, but obviously got postponed from COVID. They didn't know that the restrictions would be lifted by then, so they postponed it to a Paralympic year, which was a little bit random and something we didn't really expect. But for Australia, we were obviously focusing on the Paralympics. So we comprised a team that could pretty much only get quota spots for the Paralympic team. So one of the differences between the Olympic committee and the Paralympic committee is how we create our athletics team. So because there are so many different classifications and different events, and events sort of double up. So there's multiple 1500s, multiple 100s, and multiple throwing events for the same, like for the same event over different classifications. We can't just take top three from each classification and each event. So I will be competing for a spot against a long jumper, where in the able-bodied scene, if you're looking for a spot on an Olympic team, you're only competing against people in the same sort of race as you. So how it works is at each championship event, we figure out the size of our team by how well we sort of compete. So a top four, I think, gets Australia a quota spot for another team. So in say in Paris 2023, each one of our athletes, and this is split between male and female, each one of our team members has the ability to get a quota spot, not for them specifically, but to build a team size for the Paralympic Games per se. So in 2023, I came third. I was in I think it was top 5 actually. I was in the top 5, so I got a quota spot for the Paralympics to create the team size. So that quota spot isn't specifically for me. It's just to increase the size of the team. So pretty much what Athletics Australia did, they took a team to Kobe of people that could only get quota spots to create the Paralympic team bigger. So because I got a quota spot at World Champs in 2023, I wasn't eligible to get another quota spot at Kobe because each athlete can only get one.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Is there a maximum amount of spots?
There's like a maximum amount of spots you could create. So each event is able to take 3 per event. So say you had a maximum size of a team for 3 in every single event, which would be hard to do because you'd need to build up the quota spots as well. So there is like a maximum, but that's like the maximum that athletes you'd be able to take anyway, if that makes sense.
And the quota spot that you created is just a spot. It's not necessarily the T38 1500.
It's not necessarily.
Oh, I see.
So say I got that quota spot in 2023, and then I only got like 1 B qualifier in 2024. Someone else who got a couple A qualifiers in another event, in another classification, could be in the quota spot that I got for the team, even if they didn't get one in 2023. So it can be pretty harsh, and it's purely based on team size, not actually, you're not fighting for your spot, but the larger the team size is, the more chance they'll select you. Anyway,
right.
So
You mentioned A spot and B spot. Firstly, what does that mean? And secondly, how do you then get on the team?
Yeah, so that's through the qualification system. So each event for each classification has 2 qualifying times. We've got an A qualifying time, which is usually an A qualifier is based off the top 3 world ranking spots. So say the 3rd fastest time in the world for my event, the T38 1500 meters, was 4 minutes. And that would then become an A qualifying time for the next season. So an A qualifying time pretty much means if you get one of those, you'll be selected for a games, pretty much. And then a B qualifier is based off, I think, the top 7. So say the 7th fastest time in the world was like a 4:07, and you got a 4:07, that's a B qualifier. There's a lot more people that get Bs, and if you get a B, you don't necessarily get selected, but you're eligible to get selected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow, such a huge process.
Yeah. It's when it's on paper, it's sort of more simple, but yeah, describing it can be a bit hard.
Yeah. No, you've done a brilliant job. How far in advance from something like the Paralympics are you getting those quota spots?
Yep. So usually a qualification window is about 1 year long. So the qualification window for the Paralympics started at World Champs last year in July. So we have a full year to try to get a minimum, I think it's 2 qualification times. So to be eligible, they also you need 3 times with like, I think 2 Bs is like the minimum to be considered for selection. If you have a B qualifier, I think you don't go into the bracket of being eligible to be selected. It's pretty brutal, but it makes sense. And because of another thing with the quota spot system is it's based on gender as well. So say the women have a really good run and they get a lot of quota spots, all the quota spots they earned is only for women. And then it's the same with for men as well.
Yeah. Angus, you're a T38 athlete, cerebral palsy. I understand that can look and be different for everyone. What is your experience of cerebral palsy? How does it affect you?
It's definitely grown over the years. It's yeah, it's very different for everyone. For me, it was a pretty big thing growing up. So I went to a lot of physiotherapy, and I've sort of learnt to live with it pretty well. And a good coping mechanism for me was doing sports and sort of staying active and making sure my muscles were sort of well used. It's like anything. If you train your muscle to be good at something, it'll improve, and that's it's very applicable to CP as well. And they're learning now that a great way to actually help cerebral palsy is by getting kids into sport and keeping active, because it improves range of motion and way of living. So I grew up working with Novita, who's like they're an organization that work with cerebral palsy specifically. Um, they have a bunch of physios that help people, and they also do treatment. So they'll do things like serial castings. They'll organize things like Botox shots. So Botox is usually known for like face injections and making sure you look good, but it's well used for actually helping like loosen calves and loosening muscles that would be affected by cerebral palsy as well. So when I was younger, I used to go into hospital and have Botox shots to sort of help my calves um, with their range of movement and sort of stretch them, if anything. And then what's another one? I can't even think of it right now. But
That's
yeah,
okay.
pretty much.
Oh, I was
Yeah, that's it.
I was actually just
No,
gonna
you're right.
ask, can you explain a bit about what it is?
Yeah. So cerebral palsy is usually a disability that's caused at birth, maybe from a brain injury or lack of oxygen to the brain. In my case, my mum was pretty sick during birth, so I was pretty premature, which led to a brain injury on my left side. That caused me to have cerebral palsy in both of my calves and my like right side of my body, in my arm. So that pretty much caused tightness in my calves and slow twitch muscle fibers in my right arm. So my right side moves a little slower than my left does. And yeah, I grew up in serial castings a fair bit. So to sort of help my range of movement, I would go into serial castings to stretch out my calves, pretty much holding them in like a 90-degree angle. So say when I was sleeping as a little kid, my natural position would be to point my toes out and sort of shorten my calf muscle. And yeah, I would go into treatment and go in these like 3-month blocks of having my have my calves in these 90-degree position to sort of stretch out the muscle and make sure they're moving well. And as I've sort of grown up and kept up with my sport, running is obviously a pretty heavy thing to do on the calves, so it can be pretty damaging at times, but it also helps keep them stretched because they're well used.
I've heard you say that the doctors, when you were born, basically said you well, they doubted whether you'd even walk, let alone run.
Yeah.
What were how did your parents deal with that? Like, and what are they doing with you, and how are they educating you as you grow up?
Yeah. For me, I obviously didn't learn about that until I was a little bit older, but pretty much what they have to do in the hospitals is pretty much explain to your parents what's happening. Most of the time they explain the worst case scenario, and for me, obviously being premature and they didn't have too much information about how I was going to come out, so they just prepared my parents for the worst. They found out pretty early that I was going to have cerebral palsy, purely from what the brain injury was and how it was affecting me. And they were able to identify that it was CP, but they just didn't know what severity of CP it was going to be. So they prepared my parents for the worst case scenario, which is sort of wheelchair. I'm gonna have to live a life pretty much being helped, doing everything, which is pretty tough. But fortunately, my mum she's a nurse, so she's actually in a pretty fortunate position where she understands a lot of this stuff, where a lot of parents and a lot of people that have kids with disabilities, they're not always ready for that. So that can be a pretty tough thing. And I think an important thing for what I'm doing and para-athletics and parasports in general is actually just teaching people about disability and making sure it's not something that's taboo and sort of forced upon you if it was to accidentally happen to your child. And yeah, I guess making sure everyone's not necessarily ready for it, but understands it and understands that it's not just a life-altering thing with only negative connotations to it, which is what it used to be like. And I feel like that's what's been pretty great at the moment, is it's just sort of growing into something better and people learning about it a lot more.
Absolutely. And whilst there could be negative connotations around social media, the real positive thing is now you have a platform to talk about this and to normalize this and to educate people. So I wanted to ask you, at what point, because you're still really young, at what point did you realize that you had to do things differently to other kids? You had to wear these casts for your calves. What point did you realize, and what's the mindset around that, and how does that evolve?
Yeah, I have sort of growing up, my parents, they sort of threw me in the deep end. I obviously didn't really understand much because I was a silly kid, but they didn't really treat me differently, and they didn't want to sort of cover me in cotton wool. So I just sort of, they wanted me to do things like any other kid and figure out what I couldn't do and what I could do for myself, which I think's a pretty good way of doing things, because as soon as you start putting limitations on people, that's when they become limited. And I think a good way of figuring things out is for yourself and learning how to overcome obstacles, which is what they sort of did for me. I remember going to school. I also had calipers, which are pretty much, you know the movie Forrest Gump, where he's like running and he's got a bunch of stuff on his legs and the metal and the straps. That's pretty much what I had on my legs when I was a little kid, except it wasn't metal and straps. It was like these big plastic boots. They did the same things as castings. They would pretty much let my foot move past so I could walk, but they wouldn't let me bend my foot out. So I used to go to school wearing those, and I remember kids coming up to me and asking me why I was wearing them, and I remember being really frustrated because I couldn't explain it. I was like 7 years old and I didn't even know why I was wearing them. And kids were like coming up to me and asking me why I wear those, and then I would take them off and do sports, and they were like, "You're not even disabled. Like, I don't know why you'd even wear that." And it's like, it's a bunch of 7-year-olds talking to each other. But I remember at that time just being pretty confused, not really understanding. And I remember coming home and just sort of talking to my parents and like just asking a bunch of questions why, because I was obviously sort of being interrogated by a bunch of little kids and I didn't really know what to say. And I remember just sort of feeling a little alone in that period of time, not really having anyone to relate with or anyone to sort of talk to about what I'm going through. And I just remember, I probably didn't explain it very well myself, being a little kid, but that was what I thought was pretty cool heading into the paraathletics scene when I was about 10 years old and learning about people with the same disability as me and learning about people that have sort of gone through the same experiences I did. And I remember the first time meeting Dion Kenzie, who's a T38 1500 meter runner with CP, and sort of, I remember talking to him about him growing up and I remember him saying one specific thing about him being at school, and people telling him, you don't even look disabled. And I remember feeling like this moment of, what the hell? I was like pretty shook by it, because it was something that I had sort of kept to myself for so long and never really had anyone to talk to or relate to about. And I think that's one thing that's pretty incredible about parasports is there are kids out there that might feel alone, might feel isolated, or sort of individualized for their disability. And now with parasports and para-athletics and just the para movement in general, these people have others that they can relate with and sort of a group to feel supported by.
Yeah, and also a sense of belonging as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
What do you want people to know about CP?
I just want them to know that it comes in all shapes and forms, and I don't like I don't like to think that there's a kid out there being questioned if he's disabled or not, and sort of have to questioning himself and the sort of value he brings. Because I remember kids saying that to me, and I felt like a fraud. I felt like people are questioning me about myself, like I'm just still a human being, and people are questioning me whether I'm dishonest or a liar, because that's pretty much how it felt as a little kid. Having older people who you don't really understand tell you, like, you've got a disability, we've got to help you, and then having little kids saying you don't look disabled, like it. I remember feeling so contradicting at that time, and a sort of struggle. And it's something I still deal with now, but I obviously have the tools to educate people and explain it, which I think is really important.
It is so important, that education piece. And I wonder, do you have any thoughts or ideas around, I mean, kids will be kids, and the beauty about being a child is that you are curious and you see things differently, and you are really honest, and you say what's on your mind, whether it's a good thing or not. But kids are really honest. Is there something that you would want in schools, or how do you see, you know, the young kid with CP growing up? How would you want them or help them make them feel better or educated, or that sense of belonging? Do you have any ideas around that?
I just want them to know that they're not alone. And yeah, that's the biggest thing for me. I had a really good opportunity to talk to some people at BTN, which is a behind the news broadcasting, which is pretty much for kids. So that's a South Australian based organization on the ABC. So they did a piece a while back, and I got invited back to my old school just down the road, and well, I had about 4 classes, and I went and said gay to them, and they were loving it. They all watched it and they all loved it, and it was actually pretty interesting how much of them got a good understanding of what cerebral palsy is, and also a good understanding of my story. And a lot of them were sort of not even apologetic, but they were really just understanding of everything, which I thought was pretty interesting. And when put into sort of a format that they can understand, they enjoy it and they love learning about that stuff, which I thought was really incredible.
That's so fantastic. I forgot about BTN.
Yeah.
We used to watch that in
Yeah.
schools as a kid, and I'm a wee bit older than you. So it's been going around for a little while. That's so good.
Yeah.
And yeah, those are the things that really do help and get kids interested in learning, and it does expose them to things that they may not in their own life and environment.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's so fantastic. I would love to hear more about your training and your routine and how you manage, especially because it affects your calves, how you manage your recovery and training.
So pretty much my training schedule is pretty much 6 days a week. So I have 3 main training sessions in a week, on a Tuesday, Thursday, and a Saturday. So they're anything from threshold sessions, track sessions, hill sessions, things like that. And then every other day I'll be jogging, and out of those 2 other days I'll go to the gym as well. So I have a gym program, And between then, I have to fit in a fair bit of recovery. Obviously with my CP, it probably doesn't help that I'm enjoying my golf so much. It probably takes away a bit from the recovery factor. Constantly being on my feet,
It's
but
mental recovery.
yeah, it's mental recovery, it's mental strength. But yeah, sort of staying on top of how I'm feeling is probably the most important thing, and making sure I'm listening to my body and not just ignoring it, which is definitely, I would say, a bit of a downfall for some runners. They're obviously, I feel like we're always pretty hungry for improvement, and part of that we can sacrifice our sort of our body state and sort of go backwards sometimes because we're so willing and wanting to improve all the time. So yeah, I guess sort of just listening to my body and making sure I'm not being silly.
You said part of your training is the gym. What I'd love to know is, when did you start? When did you start using the gym as a tool, part of your training sessions, and what are you doing in the gym?
Yeah. So when I was a lot younger, I did a pretty different sort of gym. Yeah, some really different stuff in the gym. It was more like active work, not many weights. It was a lot of like body weight training. And I feel like for the age I did that when I was about 14, 15, for about 2 years. And I think at that period of time, it was pretty good. It was, I wouldn't call it low intensity, but it took away from a lot of the load I was doing at the time. So I was doing a lot less running and more of that sort of intense gym work with minimal weights. So not as much load and a lot more active and aerobic gym work, if that makes sense. And then over the past couple of years, as my like sort of mileage has added up, I've done a lot more sort of power work in the gym, which has mainly started at the beginning of towards the end of 2023. So about this time last year was when I started to get into the gym a lot more. And mostly it's like a few plyometrics, some weights, and yeah, sort of conditioning and making sure I don't get injured.
Yeah, I'd love to know, like, in terms of your recovery, do you have, set sort of things that you do and set days? And as you said before, you want to get better. I mean, you're driven to continuously get better, and that can sometimes be at the cost of your body. But you can't really do that because potentially you don't know how long it could take to recover. So when you're listening to your body, is it a matter of, I feel good, but I still have to do the recovery because that's part of the training program or the routine? Or is it, my body feels good, so I'm going to push a little bit more, or I'm going to do something extra because I want to take advantage of how I'm feeling?
Yep. So at the moment, we've been basing a lot of our training off patterns and things we've sort of already experienced. That's sort of been the safest way to make sure I don't end up in a hole. So for me, with my cerebral palsy, even if I'm feeling good before a session, I'm trying not to push the envelope too much, because if I head into a hole, that's like not just one bad session next week for me. That could be an entire week sort of ruined from one session. I might have done well, but I've sort of pushed it too far. So my fatigue, if I fatigue my muscles too hard and I can't recover within my set recovery time between sessions, that session will sort of have a snowball effect onto the next sort of 3 sessions where I'll need to be really careful. And if I end up doing that, I'll probably end up needing to sacrifice 2 mediocre sessions to get back into a rhythm of giving out quality sessions again, which is something, it's just sort of been a learning experience over the last 3 years, and understanding what responds well to my body and what doesn't.
What does?
Usually, usually it's a lot more threshold stuff at the moment. So when I first started running as a junior, I did a lot of lactic work, but that I sort of had to take away a lot of the mileage. So lactic sessions will leave me domsy for like three or more days, a lot longer than an able-bodied runner usually would. So I've been working on a lot more threshold stuff at the moment and pretty much leaving it to one lactic session a week or high intensity session where, yeah, if I push the envelope too hard on a big Saturday, say I'm too excited or I'm running with some new people that I might want to beat and have a bit of a rivalry with, I probably need to keep myself in check a little more than maybe a able-bodied runner would.
Yeah. And what are you doing for recovery? Is there anything specific?
Yeah, so I have a dedicated like massage and sort of physio session every fortnight, and then especially when I'm away on camps and have these facilities, I'll be like using the ice bath and things like that. I usually respond pretty well to that. Sort of helps with DOMS really well, which is part of the reason I'm excited to sort of make the move to Canberra as well, to sort of have those facilities on standby at the AIS, and everything's sort of pretty close, which is helpful as well.
Yeah. Tell us about the move to Canberra. Why are you doing that?
Yeah, just for probably a bit more of an environment change and sort of surrounding myself with better runners, I guess, and making sure I'm sort of keeping myself driven and also something new, exciting. I've never really liked staying still, and I guess at the moment, since I've been back, I just feel myself sort of going into a spiral of like doing the same stuff every day, which is what training is, but I just want to sort of spice it up, I guess. And I would say moving to another state, that'll probably do it. New environment,
I
meeting some
think
new
so.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I would say just meeting new people and getting out of home, which is something I find pretty exciting as well.
Yeah, I can relate in the sense, not the running part, but the the getting out of an environment and getting into a new one. That does have such an impact on your own energy and the excitement, and the thoughts around new opportunities and possibilities. It does really make a difference.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I'm hungry for, and that's what I'm sort of excited for as well. And I like the idea of just racing new people as well. I feel like I've talked about this a few times with Jared Clifford, who's a good running friend of mine. We find whenever you're racing at like a local meet, you've got your people that you race with pretty often, and you sort of have a preconception of like how they are compared to you, whether you should be behind them or they should be in front of you, or vice versa. I just said that the same way twice, but yeah, either way around.
Reiterating it.
Either way around, and I feel like racing new people, you sort of like a limitless to how you're going to race because you don't really know anyone, which I find pretty exciting for racing as well. And I feel like that's probably why so many Australians run really well in Europe, is because they don't really know anyone and they just know they're fit and they can run well. And I feel like that's probably what led me to such a good race in Germany while I was over there as well.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where if you're training with the same people all the time, you're only as good as the people that you're around. And so
Yeah.
to be challenged, and that's all you know as well. So it's so
Mm.
important. I mean, I know you compete all over the world, but it is so important to surround yourself by other athletes and different skill levels and different strengths as well, because you're always able to learn something from the people that you're around.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I've found pretty interesting. I remember my first training camp with Jared and his squad when I was 16, and I remember the sort of environment change that I went through then. That was pretty intense for me because it was sort of a step up in professionalism for me. It was my first training camp. I wouldn't say I wasn't necessarily 100% committed to running, but I wasn't sure if that was going to be my future. And I remember that training camp being a pretty big turning point for me. I sort of increased my seriousness in the sport, and I remember thinking, this is like what I want to do, and this is what I want to work towards, sort of meeting those new people and sort of getting a newfound love for running. and hearing their experiences as well.
And what else was it about that changed your mind?
I guess sort of the realization on how much I can improve, I guess. I remember coming off that training camp and had a couple good races, which is always a good thing to get you happy about running, is seeing some improvement. And I remember just coming off those races and thinking, I've still got so much more in the tank and I'm already making steps forward. So it was sort of like it caught me hook, line and sinker. As soon as I came off that training camp, I ran a couple good races and I realized this is something I just want to keep pursuing. And I'm addicted to this feeling, which is, yeah, pretty much what happened.
And also you've got so much more to give.
Yeah.
You've obviously had so much success and you're still so young. When you look back at everything that you've achieved so far, how would you describe success for yourself?
I think this is a pretty good question, because I think I would have answered this really differently when I was younger. I feel like when I was first starting athletics, I would have completely based this off achievements and sort of running success, and now I've seen so much more because I feel like running sort of helped me grow as a person, not only in meeting new people, but just learning a lot of new things about myself and what drives me. And I would think a good description for success is just finding something you enjoy, and that's what I've found, and that's what I've really come to appreciate, is the fact that I've found a sport that I've sort of fallen in love with. And even though I have my highs and my lows, which is what probably makes it so enjoyable, I'm just really appreciative to have found this in my life. And I know that there's probably a lot of people out there still looking, and I encourage those people to keep going, because it does exist, and I feel like there's something out there for everyone.
Oh, I love that. And you're right. Like, even though you could be so passionate and driven for something, there will be lows no matter what. And they're your greatest learning experiences, even though they suck at the time.
Yeah.
They will be your greatest learning curves.
Yeah.
What are you most excited about aiming in for the future, both as an athlete, but also as a person outside of the sport?
Yeah, I'm just excited to sort of keep going where I'm at with my running. I'm in a really good headspace, I feel, at this time, and I'm really excited to sort of see juniors that I've met along the way grow. That's something I've really enjoyed doing, is obviously with the this is pretty new, but the creation of like social media and things. Like, when I was getting into athletics, I didn't really have a phone, didn't have social media, and now kids and athletes are growing up with this at their fingertips, and kids are reaching out to me who are like T38s or kids with disabilities, and they're telling me that they're getting into athletics and that I'm part of the reason that they're getting into it. And I sort of am so appreciative of what I'm doing, because that was my goal, is to sort of give kids the experience of what I did when I was growing up, and to actually have the opportunity to see that and meet some of them, and then have the ability to reach out to me, I think is awesome.
That is so awesome. And do you mentor them? Are there opportunities for them to kind of work with you, or do you do speaking gigs? Like, how much are you doing?
Yeah, so I've done a couple speaking gigs at like schools. I just do speaking gigs pretty much whenever I get reached out to, pretty much. So I really enjoy doing those. I've I took on a couple running clubs at my old school at Westminster, so that's where I finished my last 3 years of school. Did a running club with them, which I really enjoyed. Obviously went to my old school in Tatachilla to say good day to some of the junior school kids once that BTN episode came out. And yeah, I've been working, not really working closely, but sort of staying in touch with this one kid named Cooper. He's a T38 400 meter runner. He's on the up at the moment. He's about 16, and he's on track to probably break a lot of my records. He's going really well, and it's been pretty exciting.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
Put it out there. Angus Hincksman is available for any speaking opportunities that you may have. Reach out. This is so awesome. Angus, if there was something that you wanted people to know, whether it's about you, whether it's about parasport, anything in general that we may not have covered today, what would that be?
I would say the biggest thing for people to know is just don't be afraid to ask questions. I think that's the most important part of the learning process, is understanding that we're all human and most people are pretty nice. And if you show some interest and are willing to ask questions, a lot of people appreciate that more than you'd think.
I love that so much. I've definitely been known in the past to be afraid of asking the questions for fear of sounding insert whatever you think there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's such good advice. Angus, this has been so awesome. I really love chatting with you. I want to end it with the last question you asking to the listener today. What is one question that you'd want to ask the listener so that they go away thinking about it today?
Yeah, I would ask people, I don't know, maybe I don't want to make it a basic question. I want to make sure it's good.
You want it to be life-changing.
I guess
sometimes the basic ones are the ones that we really forget to think about, and basics are the fundamentals to anything. So
I would ask people, when was the last time they tried something new or put themselves out there? That's something that sort of got me. Yeah, that's the thing that sort of got me into the parasports scene. I played a lot of sports growing up, but I never really thought to try doing para-athletics or any sort of parasports. So I guess making sure you're keeping your options open and making sure you're trying new things.
Love it. So you came through with the goods in the end.
Took a bit of time, but yeah.
That's okay. Angus, this has been awesome. I so appreciate you chatting with me today. I think you've got so much to come, and I'm so excited to watch you in the future. Thank you for chatting with me on the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. Please make sure to subscribe to the channel, rate and review the podcast, because that helps me to continue to speak to incredible people doing incredible things and bring those conversations to you. Make sure you follow Angus on his Instagram and follow his journey throughout the next 4 years and see all the amazing things that he's going to do on the world stage. As always, stay awesome, and I'll catch you in the next one.